Okay, let's talk more about the potentially significant fallout from perhaps a prolonged dock worker strike. And for that, we're joined by Anthony Chan. Anthony's a former chief economist at JPMorgan Chase. Anthony, good to see you.
Good to see you, Sean.
Okay, let's talk about what happened over the last 24, 48 hours. There are somewhat 33,000 workers who walked off the job. What does that mean instantly, and where do you think the negotiations stand at this point?
Well, at this point, the negotiations are not really productive because they're very far apart. I mean, they've asked for a 77% increase in salary over several years. And the big question is that something that they need because of inflation? I just did a study on a Substack article that found that if you look at the personal consumption deflator from before the pandemic, a month before, January to now, the PCE is up 18.4%. Now, food prices are up more than that, 24.1%. But the question is, are they up 77%? And the answer is they're not. So do they deserve 77%? That's something for the negotiators to determine. I certainly don't want to opine on that.
Sure.
But you cannot argue that these increases are necessary because of inflation. You're going to need to make other arguments.
Yeah, I think that what a lot of these union negotiators are going to point to are the amount of money the ports have been bringing in, because it's been hundreds of billions of dollars. So there's a lot of profit there, and I think the overall feeling is, all right, let's spread the wealth a little bit. But also automation, that's a big deal.
That is a big deal, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at this country historically, the way we increase wages without causing inflation is by increasing productivity. Productivity since 1990, again, I've looked at the data, is up an average of 2% per year. And inflation, if you look at the consumer price index, which is the more popular one that people like to look at, from 1990 is up 2.7%. So that means that on average, workers, in order to basically do okay, increase because of productivity and keep up with inflation, they need about 4.7% per year. Yeah. Not a 77% increase, but here's the catch. The negotiations here is that they're trying to slow down productivity improvements, which, by the way, is the real source of increasing worker productivity and worker standard of living. So if you basically say we don't want any productivity improvements because we want to protect jobs, that means we don't want more efficiency. So where's this money going to come from? Yes, maybe you could argue that these companies made a lot of money over the last couple of years, but the question is, are they going to make that kind of money in perpetuity? That's another big question.
That is. Okay, so the vice presidential debate last night, the blame game in high gear already. Democrats are in a very tough position. Kamala Harris is on track to poll the lowest labor numbers ever for Democratic presidential candidates. And what about Trump? Because he is widely seen as anti-union.
Well, I think that when it comes to politics, it really depends on how skillful you are in trying to convince voters that this is the worst inflation ever. It is not the worst inflation ever. No. We had higher inflation during the Jimmy Carter years, and we've had higher inflation before that. As I mentioned before, wages are up 23.8% if you look at average hourly earnings. That is in excess from January of 2020 to the latest numbers with the last employment report. That's in excess of any increase that you've seen out there with all prices in general. The only exception is food prices. They're up 24.1%. But Sean, the difference between 24.1 and 23.8, you barely could see any difference between the two numbers. Statistically, they're indifferent. Yeah. So to argue that somehow the workers in general are so worse off because of inflation, the statistics simply don't support that view. They don't.
Okay, plainly and simply, do you see a quick end of this? And if it does drag on, it's going to derail efforts to control inflation here in the United States. And it seems as though Democrats would have a huge amount to lose come November.
Well, I think there's a solution. I think the solution is if they want to get twice as much as the increase in inflation, then you have to allow the companies to be able to increase productivity so they can justify those salaries. But if you basically say no increase in productivity, but we want a 70% or an 80% increase in wages, that simply is going to cause problems for the rest of the economy. And I'll tell you why, Sean, because other unions are watching. So I'm talking about the Boeings of the world, the United Auto Workers at some point, the teachers, everybody's going to be working. And guess what? Some of these workers are making $200,000 with overtime. If they get that 77, then you're going to be getting more than $350,000 a year. I'm not saying I never criticize people for making more money, but what do you think somebody working at McDonald's is going to think when somebody's making $350,000 and they're only making $15 or $20 an hour? They want more.